New heart, new hope. Emma woke up before the sunrise. But this time, it wasn't from restlessness or dread. It was peace. Still. Deep. Real. She sat on the edge of her bed, the soft morning light stretching across the wooden floor of the cottage, her mother's Bible in her lap. Pages were beginning to soften from her touch, edges curled from use. The word no longer felt like a foreign language, it was becoming a voice. His voice. She had read late into the night. About grace. About mercy. About the woman who had bled for 12 years and touched Jesus' robe. The leper who said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." The thief on the cross who whispered, "Remember me." And Jesus did. He always did. Emma closed the Bible and whispered, "Thank you." This time, she didn't question whether he heard her. She knew he did. Down at the retreat center, the day was already underway. Volunteers were unloading boxes, prepping food, sweeping porches, and sorting donations. Emma jumped in without needing to be asked. She worked alongside Margaret most of the morning, and the older woman watched her with quiet pride. "You have a light in your eyes today," Margaret said, arranging canned goods on a shelf. Emma smiled. "Feels like it. You know, when you first arrived, I wasn't sure you'd stay more than a week." "Neither did I." Margaret nodded. "But God did." Emma paused. "It's strange. I spent years working so hard to build a life that looked perfect. And it never made me feel whole. Now, I'm doing things like labeling pantry items and folding socks for strangers. And I feel full." Margaret smiled knowingly. "That's what happens when you let Jesus fill the empty places. You begin to overflow." Later that day, Emma joined Luke at a small construction project behind the chapel. They were rebuilding a wheelchair ramp that had rotted from too many winters. Luke handed her a hammer and some gloves without saying much, but his smile said everything. Working beside him felt natural now. Safe. They moved in rhythm, cutting, nailing, fitting planks together. Somewhere in between, Emma looked up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked, wiping her brow. Luke shrugged. "Just thinking how different you are from the woman I met 3 weeks ago." Emma arched a brow. "Was I that bad?" He chuckled. "No. You were just hurting. Guarded. Like someone who'd learned not to trust anyone." She looked down at the wood. "I had." Luke put down his hammer and leaned against the post. "And now?" Emma hesitated. "Now, I'm learning to trust the only one who never broke a promise." He nodded. "That's a good place to start." A comfortable silence passed between them. Then Emma asked, "Have you ever thought about leaving Cross Hill? Going back to the city or somewhere else?" Luke shook his head. "Not really. My past is behind me, and this place is part of my healing. Serving here is where I feel closest to God." Emma looked out toward the hills, the chapel standing steady at the center of it all. "I used to think success was about influence," she said. "Now I think it's about impact." Luke smiled. "Those aren't always the same thing." She turned to him. "What if I told you I was offered a position back in the city? A promotion, actually. My boss called this morning." His face remained calm, but something in his eyes flickered. "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything yet." "And what do you want to say?" Emma exhaled. "I don't know. Part of me feels like going back would be like stepping into my old life again. But another part of me wonders if I'm supposed to go. Just with a different heart this time. Luke was quiet for a long moment. That's something you've got to pray through. Don't choose what's easy. Choose what's right. Emma met his eyes. And what if I don't know what that is? Luke's voice was soft. Then wait on the one who does. That evening, Emma went for a walk up the ridge trail behind the retreat center. The sky was painted in strokes of orange and purple, the sun easing behind the trees like a curtain falling on a well-lived day. She sat on a bench that overlooked the town, Cross Hill, quiet and warm, like a heartbeat in the hills. She pulled out her journal and began to write. Not about to-do lists or marketing strategies, but about grace and calling, and the ache that comes when your heart is being rewired by something holy. The next morning, she met Luke by the community garden. He was pulling weeds and humming a hymn she didn't recognize. "Hey," she said, approaching him with purpose in her step. He looked up. "Hey. You look like someone who's made a decision." Emma nodded. "I turned the job down." Luke stood. "You sure?" She smiled. "I'm not sure of anything right now. But I am sure I'm not the same woman who left that office a month ago. And going back, just to prove I could, would be for the wrong reasons." Luke stepped closer. "Then what are you going to do?" Emma looked around. "I think I'm going to stay for a while. Volunteer. Maybe help with the women's ministry Margaret keeps trying to revive." Luke's eyes lit with something like pride. Or maybe admiration. "They could use someone like you." Emma tilted her head. "Someone like me. Someone who knows what it's like to be broken and rebuilt." Their eyes met. The space between them felt charged, but not rushed. Luke reached out slowly, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. "I care about you, Emma," he said. "But I want you to know. Whatever this becomes, I want Christ at the center of it. I've built things without him before, and they all fell apart." Emma placed her hand over his. "Me too." They stood like that, close, but not clinging. Warm, but not consumed. And in that moment, Emma realized. This wasn't the end of her story. It was a new beginning. Built not on fear, but on faith. Not on performance, but on grace. Not on a man, but on the one who had saved her soul. A love worth keeping. It started slowly. No grand declarations. No fireworks. Just the steady unfolding of something real. Emma and Luke fell into a rhythm, working side by side at the retreat center during the week, sharing quiet dinners on the porch, going for walks in the early evenings when the hills were wrapped in golden light. Their conversations ran deep, sometimes joyful, sometimes hard, but always honest. They prayed together. They laughed a lot. They didn't rush. And that made all the difference. One afternoon, they were painting the inside of the women's ministry cottage, a space Emma had taken on as her new project. The walls had been cracked, the floors uneven. But slowly, it was becoming beautiful. Restored? Much like her. "Okay, moment of truth," Emma said, standing back to assess the wall. "Is this color more sunset beige or accidental peach?" Luke smirked, paintbrush in hand. "Definitely accidental peach. But in a good way." Emma groaned. "Uck, I knew it," he chuckled. "Relax. It looks great." She dipped her brush into the paint tray. "You're just saying that because you like me." He looked at her seriously. "No. I'm saying it because I respect you." Emma paused. "That means more than you know." They painted in silence for a while before Luke asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back to the city?" Emma hesitated. "Maybe someday? But not to prove anything. If I go, it'll be because he sends me, not because I'm running." Luke nodded. "That's wisdom." Emma glanced over at him. "And what about you? Ever think about leaving Cross Hill?" He smiled. "Not really. I feel called here. There's still work to be done. People to help. Lives to rebuild." She bit her lip. "Would you stay? If I did?" Luke set down his brush and wiped his hands on a rag. "Emma, I need you to hear me on this." She turned to face him. "I care about you deeply," he said. "But I don't want to build anything with you that isn't first built on him. If this turns into a relationship, I want it to be the kind that points both of us back to Jesus." Emma's eyes softened. "That's what I want too. I've been in relationships before that were based on need," Luke continued. "Loneliness, desire, control. But real love, the kind worth keeping, it has to begin with surrender." Emma stepped closer. "I think this might be the first time I've actually understood that." He reached for her hand. "Then maybe this is where we begin." She nodded. "Not because we're trying to fix each other, but because we've both let Jesus do the fixing first," he finished. They stood there, hands intertwined, surrounded by half-painted walls and drying floors. It wasn't glamorous. It was better. It was holy. That evening, they walked down to the lake at the edge of town. The water shimmered under a crescent moon, and the air was cool with the first hints of spring. They sat on a weathered bench, shoulders brushing. "I used to think love was about adrenaline," Emma said. "Big moments. Grand gestures." Luke looked out over the water. "It can be. But the love that lasts, it's usually found in the small things. Like forgiveness, patience, prayer." She smiled. "You make it sound so sacred." "It is," he said. "Especially when God is in it." Emma's heart swelled. Not with fantasy, but with truth. And truth, she was learning, was the most romantic thing of all. A few days later, Emma received another call from the city. A new offer. A new opportunity. Her boss's voice was hopeful. "Emma, I know you said you weren't ready, but this position, it's yours if you want it. We'll hold it open for one more week." Emma thanked her and promised to think about it. That night, she sat on the porch with Luke, sipping tea and watching fireflies dance across the lawn. "You okay?" he asked. "I got another offer," she said quietly. "Same company. More money. More responsibility." Luke didn't flinch. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels like I should say yes. It's what I always thought I wanted. But I'm not that person anymore," she said. "I don't want to chase things that won't satisfy me. I want to be led, not driven." Luke nodded. "That the spurt working in you?" Emma looked at him, her voice tender. "But what if God is calling me back? Not to chase success, but to serve there. To help women like me." Luke's smile was soft. "Then I'll be proud of you. I'll miss you, but I'll be proud." Emma's chest tightened. "Would we still?" He reached for her hand. "Emma, love rooted in Christ doesn't die just because of distance. If he calls you away, he'll also sustain us through it. If it's his will, nothing can separate what he's built." Tears welled in her eyes. I don't deserve this kind of love. Luke brushed a tear from her cheek. None of us do. That's what makes it grace. Emma spent the rest of the week praying, seeking, listening. She fasted one morning, journaling by the lake. She spoke with Margaret, who reminded her, God's will is not always the most comfortable path, but it's always the most meaningful one. And by the week's end, Emma had her answer. She would return to the city. Not to reclaim her old life, but to walk into a new purpose. She would take the position, but on her terms. With a new title, Daughter of Grace, Servant of Christ. She would build a women's support group inside the company, speak to churches and return to Cross Hill regularly. And she would keep her heart tethered to the one who had saved her. Before she left, Emma and Luke took one last walk together through the hills. They didn't need many words. Just presence. When they reached the top, Emma turned to him. I'm going, she said. But I'm not running anymore. I'm being sent. Luke pulled her into a warm embrace. I know. And you'll visit? She asked, half teasing. He smiled. Only if you make me your famous burnt grilled cheese again. She laughed. Deal? They kissed, soft, slow, reverent. Not as a goodbye, but as a promise. Redeeming grace. 6 months later, Emma stood at the front of a crowded conference room in downtown Chicago. She wore a simple navy dress. No heels, no polished perfection, just confidence rooted in something deeper than success. Her voice carried not because of training, but because it was filled with conviction. Behind her was a banner that read, Wholeness over Hustle, healing the women who lead. In front of her sat over 100 women, professionals, entrepreneurs, assistants, and executives. All of them carrying burdens they rarely talked about. All of them silently asking the same question Emma had asked herself not long ago, is there more to life than this? Emma didn't give them a business strategy. She gave them her story. The story of how she'd fallen apart. How she'd buried herself in work. How she'd hated God for not saving her mother, and how she'd blamed herself for not being enough. She told them about Cross Hill. About a man named Luke who pointed her toward truth. About a woman named Margaret who modeled grace. But most of all, about Jesus. The one who had loved her long before she ever noticed him. The one who had waited. Who had whispered into the silence. Who had picked up every broken piece of her soul, and rebuilt her with his own hands. He didn't just give me peace, Emma said, her voice steady. He gave me purpose. The room was silent. Not with indifference, but with awe. A few women cried quietly. Some smiled. All of them listened. And when Emma invited them to stay after for prayer, more than half the room remained. That night, Emma sat in her apartment, legs curled beneath her on the couch, sipping tea and watching the city lights flicker. She still lived in the same city. But everything about her life had changed. She had started a ministry group for working women, hosted monthly retreats for burnout recovery, and partnered with churches across the city to offer counseling and support. She still worked part-time at her old company, but now, she worked with people instead of for a title. And every Saturday morning, without fail, she called Margaret. On Sunday nights, she FaceTimed Luke. They'd visited each other 4 times already, each time a mix of joy and longing, of praying through the slow and sacred way love was growing between them. They weren't rushing it. They were building something meant to last. And they were both letting God set the pace. On a warm Saturday in early September, Emma returned to Cross Hill. Margaret met her at the train station, arms wide and eyes misty. You look alive, sweetheart, she said, pulling Emma into a long hug. "I am," Emma whispered. They spent the afternoon catching up, walking through the gardens, laughing over Margaret's latest attempts at sourdough. By evening, the sky turned a warm rose gold, and the chapel bells rang softly in the distance. "Luke's waiting at the lake," Margaret said, handing Emma a small picnic basket. "I told him you'd find him there." Emma smiled. "You really are the Holy Spirit in an apron." Margaret winked. "Don't tell the pastor." The lake was still as glass when Emma arrived. Birds skimmed the surface, and the air held that early autumn sweetness, warmth laced with goodbye. Luke stood at the water's edge, skipping stones like a boy lost in thought. When he turned and saw her, he smiled the way he always did, like she was an answer to prayer. "Hey," he said, walking toward her. "Hey," she replied, heart thudding. They sat on the same old bench, the picnic basket between them. Emma handed him a grilled cheese sandwich, slightly burnt, as usual. He took one bite and nodded. "Perfect." They ate in comfortable silence, feet brushing, shoulders touching. Finally, Emma turned toward him. "I want you to know something," she said. "I'm not coming back because I'm tired of the city. I know. And I'm not choosing you instead of purpose." Luke's eyes were soft. "I'd never ask you to." She took his hand. "I'm choosing both. Because God gave me both. You and a mission. Love and calling. And I believe He's big enough to hold it all." He nodded. "So do I." She pulled something from her bag, a small wooden cross, simple and smooth. "I want this to be the center of everything we build," she said. Luke took it in his hand, thumb brushing over the grain. "It already is." That Sunday morning, they stood together in the chapel as Pastor James preached about restoration. Emma listened with tears in her eyes, Luke's hand resting gently in hers. "We all have ruins in our lives," the pastor said. "But our God is a redeemer. He takes the broken pieces and makes something more beautiful than we ever imagined. If you surrender to Him, you don't just get a second chance. You get a new life." Emma bowed her head, overcome. She had been lost. Now she was found. She had been chasing approval. Now she walked in grace. She had tried to build a perfect life. Now she was letting God build a redeemed one. And as the congregation stood to sing, Emma lifted her voice, unpolished, unrehearsed, but full of truth. She had been saved. By love. By mercy. By Jesus. And that love was the kind worth keeping. Epilogue, 1 year later. The chapel was full that June afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows as Margaret stood at the front, eyes shining, hands wringing a bouquet of white wildflowers. A bouquet of white wildflowers. Emma walked down the aisle, not to be rescued, but to say yes to the man who had walked beside her. And to the God who had never let go. Luke stood at the altar, tears in his eyes, heart steady. When Emma reached him, she smiled. "I thought I had to build a perfect life," she whispered. "But all I needed was a perfect Savior." And with the vows they spoke, the prayers they prayed, and the grace that covered it all, they began their forever. Not on the foundation of feelings, but on Christ alone.